My name is Heidi Schiller. I'm a librarian here, and this is actually our last installment of the NBCL Local Author Series for the season. We take a break during the summertime, and then we'll start up in the fall. I want to thank the Friends of the Library for providing wine and snacks. I'd also like to thank the North Shore Writers Association for being our fabulous partners in this series. And I'd also like to thank 32 Books, who is here selling Stephen's books tonight. So they're back there, and he will be signing after the reading. So we're going to start off with Kathy Scrimshaw, who is the past president of the North Shore Writers Association. She's going to be introducing Maggie Bolitho. Please welcome Kathy.
Thank you, Heidi, and welcome everyone. It's my very great pleasure to be up here tonight introducing Maggie. She's been a member of the North Shore Writers Association for 5 years now, and she's had a very interesting life. She's an accountant by training, but you could take all those accountant jokes and just throw them out the window because they don't apply to Maggie at all. She was born in Victoria. She has lived in 4 major Canadian cities. She's spent many years living in Australia with her husband, Alan. Then back to North Vancouver, and now she's come full circle and she's living back in Victoria again. Now, over the years, Maggie has been a scuba diver. She's been a volunteer scuba diver for the Vancouver Aquarium. She's been a soccer player, an equestrian, a martial arts enthusiast, and a volunteer firefighter in the Australian bush. And let me tell you, she's got some interesting stories, especially from the firefighting. And it's fascinating. I just can't even picture her when she talks about the equipment they had to wear and carry. It doesn't look like the Maggie I know. But now, I still remember the first night she showed up to a North Shore Writers Association meeting. She was very reticent about what she was actually working on. But one thing really shone in our first conversation, and that is that Maggie was a woman with a mission. She had a goal in life. She was going to be traditionally published, and nothing and no one was going to divert her from that goal. Now, as I'm sure our featured writer will tell you, being a successfully published writer requires creative talent, and she has that in abundance. But it also requires a lot more skills. You need concentration, tenacity, a highly developed work ethic, advanced time management skills, the ability to research your subject if you're not already an expert, and you need a lot of perseverance. Successful writers keep going no matter how tough the slogging gets, because the end is always worth it. Well, accountants have those skills. So do scuba divers, firefighters, horsewomen, and martial artists. And Maggie, for one, seems to thrive on challenges. So it's no surprise that her first novel is a story about the challenges faced by a family in the days immediately following the expected great earthquake of the Pacific Northwest coast. So please welcome Maggie as she reads from her newly published novel, Lockdown.
Okay, we're just going to jump in with Lockdown, Chapter 1. This is a book for the young adult audience. North Vancouver. The enemy is catching up. Oliver, run! I glanced down at him and he wagged his tail. Half wire-haired terrier, half Mexican jumping bean. He looked like a scouring pad on long, skinny legs. My little cartoon buddy. Behind us, my brother Michael and the gum-chewing kid from next door trampled like a herd of spooked wildebeests. They couldn't sneak up on a dead girl, let alone me. Rowan, where the hell are you? Called Michael, 4 years older than me and a total control freak. Was I so hard to see? Almost 6 feet tall with a mane of brown hair? I didn't exactly fade into the background. I ran faster and Oliver loped beside me. I've been running all summer, mostly away from my father, Tony. Ever since he left Mom, I refused to call him Dad. Once we were really close, but lately we couldn't breathe the same air without a fight breaking out. He gave me his opinion on almost everything, I did, and never listened to my ideas. I was nearly 16 freaking years old and swimming in quicksand. The more I struggled to be free of him, the more he demanded to know where I was every minute. When he wasn't near me in person, he made Michael his spy. 5 minutes late, and it was battle stations every one. Whenever I could, I broke free to the forest. It was only a 15-minute walk from Tony's house, but it was a different world, a private kingdom with nothing between me and Alaska but mountains and trees. If I got lost, I could follow the creeks back to the ocean and North Vancouver's rocky beaches, but I never did. Not even when I took the unmarked trails that the tourists and day trippers didn't know. Today, Michael decided to join me, and wherever he went, Jake went too. Jake was Michael's good deed for the week. Jake didn't like being in the house alone when his mom was away overnight, so he became our guest. Even though he was a little older than me, he seemed way younger, so I kept my distance. I speeded up and Oliver followed. A small brown squirrel darted into the middle of the path and shot up a nearby tree. Oliver tore after it. He barked frantically and danced on his hind legs. Zita! I used our special word from obedience training. The emergency recall command worked its magic. Oliver ran to my side and claimed his treat. The squirrel perched on a low branch and chirped a distress call that sounded like a dying smoke detector. Then it was gone. Oliver and I started running again, fleeing the evil shadows before they caught us. We plunged deeper into the woods. The light rain, which had been falling since morning, stopped. A suffocating blanket of air hung heavy and humid over everything. I could barely breathe. An eerie silence descended around me, and I didn't want to be alone. I clenched and unclenched my fists. The forest felt strange, foreign. Oliver whined for reassurance, but I didn't have any to spare, so I slipped him an extra treat. When Michael and Jake finally hauled themselves up the hill behind us, I exhaled. "Thought you were going for a walk, not a bloody race," Michael said in his usual charming way. Even though he's older than me, we look a lot alike. His hair was frizzy from the rain, and I knew mine was worse. My bangs curled and stuck together, so when I flicked them slightly, they moved in a single lump. Oliver went after a squirrel. "You better not let him go after a skunk." Michael glared at Oliver as if he had done something wrong. "Tony will have a meltdown if he comes home reeking again." Why do you think I spent months teaching him emergency recalls? Trust Michael to act like a tool when he should be congratulating me. It was the middle of August and not a single skunk incident this year. Besides, Oliver was perfect. He came back right away. Oliver didn't act proud or happy. His envelope-flapped ears lay flat against his head, and he stared into the forest. Then he growled low and deep. He was spooking me, and I wished he'd stop. "Sit," Jake said in a nervous sing-song tone that made my back teeth ache. Why'd he come anyway? If his mom knew he was in Million Canyon, she'd have a hissy fit. She'd act like he'd flown to Mexico to make a drug deal, not walked a couple of blocks to a public park. "Dogs like high pitches," Jake said. As if he knew anything about dogs, cats, or trained seals. Mrs. Patterson wouldn't let a stuffed toy into her mausoleum. "Sit," Jake repeated. Oliver sat. Traitor. But his head swung this way and that. Something was off, and he knew it. I sniffed and listened. The loamy smell of wet earth perfumed the air. Nothing more. Oliver hopped to his feet and trotted away. When he glanced back at me, I clicked my tongue and pointed to my heel. He dropped his head and walked back, checking over his shoulder the entire time. "Do you hear it?" I asked Michael. My voice came out higher than usual. He squinted and studied the forest. "Yes." "What?" said Jake, snapping the big wad of gum he'd been chewing since the minute his mom left. I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hand. The silence. Michael shielded his eyes and looked at the muted silver sky. Jake shrugged. "Yeah, so?" "It's never this quiet," I said, trying to sound cool. No need to scare Jake. He was jittery to start with. Then a tree creaked, and Oliver started to pant loudly. He raised his hackles and fixed his gaze on some point on the trail. I sucked in another mouthful of clammy air. "We should go back." Michael sounded uncannily like Tony, the prophet of doom.
"If Reza is in the building, could you please come down to the children's department? Reza?"
When I was little, I used to worship Michael. He taught me how to ride a bike and protected me in good ways, like helping me cross the street. Then, when we were both older, he used to babysit me, and that's when things went bad. All that power of being in control went to his head. Now, when Tony wasn't around, would-be King Michael assumed he was the boss. Big mistake. "Come on," he ordered, and started walking away. "Not so fast. Let Michael and Jake go. I could take care of myself anytime, any place. I'd hike this forest so many times that normally I could hear the trees breathe." I listened again and heard nothing. A prickling sensation of dread ran over me. I fished a water bottle out of the pocket of my cargo jeans. Jake stopped a few feet in front of me. When he saw I wasn't going anywhere, he smiled at me as if we were both best buds or something. In his dreams. I tipped the bottle to my mouth. As I started to drink, the trees shook. I told myself it was just a gust of wind. Then the ground trembled and a deep rumble rose from below the forest floor. The trembling strengthened to rolling, water splashed down my face. A cascade of pine needles fell in thin sheets to the ground. The noise grew louder. A million bass speakers boomed under my feet. Crazy thoughts flashed through my mind. A rock concert, a terrorist attack, a bomb. But I knew what it was, an earthquake. We'd had a few small ones this summer, and Tony had been ranting about being prepared. The ground bucked and kicked. The bear cub ran towards us out of the dark, hilly woods. Oliver snarled and leapt at it. The earth pulled sideways and back and forth, all at the same time. I dropped to my knees. Rocks and pine cones dug through the denim of my jeans. "Zita!" I screamed. For the first time, the call failed. Oliver danced around the cub. It rose to its hind feet and stared down at him. Then it dropped to all fours and leaned forward, sniffing curiously. I shrieked "Zita" over and over. Oliver drew himself up to his ground height of 14 inches. He deeked first at one side of the cub and then the other. His mouth worked furiously, warning the cub to stay away. He nipped at its paws. The cub squealed. "Oliver!" The noise of the quake buried my commands. I crawled towards him, the dirt and pine needles sticking to my hands. Another rolling mound of black fur barreled down the hill. The mother bear smacked Oliver off the trail with a single swipe. I froze. The ground shifted again and threw the bear on her back. Oliver ran over the bushes and charged her face. Blood speckled his back leg, but he didn't stop attacking. The bear's teeth glinted and snapped. Oliver curled his tail between his legs and flattened his ears. Before I could do anything, he sped away from the bears, but worst of all, away from me. The sow lumbered after him, followed by the cub. The thick undergrowth swallowed the three of them. A landslip of rocks poured down the hill and wiped out the place they last stood. "Zita!" The shuddering knocked me flat. "Oliver, come back!" The words came out strangled. I didn't know what to do. The roar of the quake started to drown everything. My stomach flipped. My mind spun. Earthquake procedures. Think. Jake fell beside me, sweat pouring down his face. The park twirled and gyrated in a dance from hell. Trees groaned and crashed to the ground. Branches rained down. Flames of panic burned up my neck. "I'm going to die here. I'm going to die here right now." I checked over my shoulder for Michael, but couldn't see him. A huge ravine had opened on the hill above us. Two colossal evergreens on either side of it lurched and smashed against each other. They held for a split second and then thundered to the ground. Massive root balls that had clung fast to the soil for hundreds of years were gripped up like anchors. Boulders and rocks plummeted down the slope. The noise pierced my ears. "Drop and cover!" I screamed at Jake. He crawled closer to me and curled into a tight ball. I pushed my face into the rough ground. Fine rocks and gnarled twigs bruised and scraped my skin. I dug my face into the dirt. The smell of camping trips and summer filled my head. I love this smell. Please let me live to smell it again. Even though he'd been Tony, only Tony to me for years, I cried out, "Daddy!" Think of Oliver, I told myself. When that bear attacked him, he looked so scared. He didn't run back to me. He ran away so the bear would chase him and leave me alone. He protected me. Now he was gone. And here I was, a forward on the Chieftain girls hockey team, whimpering like a baby. Pathetic. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Tony's mantras had surfaced. It means you hold yourself together in spite of your feelings. STOP. Stop, stay, think, observe, plan. Above all, stay calm. I waited for the panic to stop. Keep the chimp in the cage. Listen, don't let your emotions take over. Think, think, think. Listen, try to figure out what's going on. I listened. Deep in the park, metal screeching was followed by terrified wailing. The suspension bridge.
Thank you, Maggie. And I apologize for the interruption. Unfortunately, we can't disable the intercom system in this room, so it's just lost children. It's one of the hazards of having an author reading in a library. But you handled that very, very well. You didn't get spooked, no. All right, I'm going to introduce Stephen Galloway. Stephen is the author of the best-selling novel, The Cellist of Sarajevo. I bet 80% at least of the people in this room have read that book. Am I right? Yes. His new novel, The Confabulist, weaves together the life, loves, and murder of the world's greatest magician, Harry Houdini, with the story of the man who killed him twice. Stephen teaches creative writing at UBC and SFU and lives with his wife and 2 young daughters in New Westminster. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Galloway.
That's the neatest thing. Thanks, and thank you for that reading. I often think about, in various earthquake scenarios, what do you do? And I've never thought about what do you do if your dog and bears are fighting and there's an earthquake. Now I know. I actually don't. I guess you like the dog handle it. That's what I learned there. Anyway, great reading. I'll probably just do the same thing. I think I'll start by just reading the first chapter, the opening little bit of the book, and then maybe talk a bit, and then we're going to do a Q&A. So I don't need plenty of room for Q&A, because that's way more fun than mindless author yammering. Can you hear me all right? Okay. This is really, a lot of podiums are tilted, and there's nowhere to put your water. It's like an occupational hazard, along with intercoms and being a writer. This is a marvelous thing. I might build one and travel with it. Okay.
But nowhere to put the cap.
That's my own fault. I have pockets, it turns out. There's a condition called tinnitus, where you hear a ringing that isn't there. It's not a disease itself, merely a symptom of other maladies, but the constant hum of non-existent sound has been known to drive the afflicted to madness and suicide. I don't suffer from this exactly, but I have a strange feeling now and then that something wrong is going on in the background. Today's meeting with Dr. Korsakov is a good example. He's a strange little Russian who looks as though he's never let a ray of sunlight touch his skin, and when he speaks of the human body, I begin to drift. I don't see how he expects a man of my age to understand him. Thiamines, neurons, gliosis, all of it coded in his throaty accent. Well, it goes right by me. I wonder if this is the point of such talk, a reminder that he has completed medical school and I have not. It seems to me that point was seated upon my arrival in his office months ago. Did I tell him that as a young man I entertained notions of becoming a doctor? I can't remember. I was not at all paying attention to him. That much I know. But then, out of nowhere, he said something that was impossible to miss. You will, in essence, Mr. Strauss, lose your mind. I'd been staring at a potted philodendron placed in an awkward corner of his office. The room was even drabber than the hospital as a whole, but the philodendron was exquisite. As he droned, I resolved to devise a plan to steal it. The good news is that it will be gradual, and you likely won't even notice. He stared at me. He was probably worried I was going to start crying. How does a person unknowingly lose his mind? Yours is a rare condition, he said, seeming almost excited, in which the damage that is being done to your brain does not destroy cognitive function, but instead affects your brain's ability to store and process memories. In response to this, your brain will invent new memories. All I could do was sit there. Everything seemed louder and slower. The fluorescent lights were a hive of bees, and footsteps in the hallway thunderclapped toward the elevator. Somewhere down the corridor, a telephone rang a fire alarm. Eventually, I was able to ask how long I had. He shrugged. Months, years even. While you may have some associated difficulties, your condition is not life-threatening. You're not a young man, so it's possible you might die of something else before it becomes a problem. Although, it does appear that other than this, you are extraordinarily healthy. Thank you, I said, which immediately seemed stupid. It is a degenerative physiological condition, and there isn't anything at this time that can be done about it. He kept talking, but that tinnitus feeling kicked in. Imagine if your mind was making a noise, not an actual noise, but whatever the mental equivalent is. Then add in a little fogginess, and you have a pretty good idea of where I was. I realized the doctor had stood and moved from behind his desk. It seemed our appointment was over, so I stood too, but I felt I couldn't leave the conversation where things were. I really like your philodendron. I stopped myself from mentioning that he should be careful because variegated philodendrons can be highly toxic to dogs and cats. I don't know how I know this, or if it's even true. And anyway, you don't see many dogs and cats in a doctor's office, so it didn't seem like useful information. He smiled. It didn't suit his thin lips. Thank you. I find it very common. We both observed the plant for a moment. One of its fronds fluttered in the breeze from the air conditioning vent. So do I. Would you like me to take your photograph with it? I would have, but his eagerness unnerved me, and I refused. He hid his disappointment well. And now, I'm sitting outside on a bench by the main doors of the hospital. I could go straight home. There's no one waiting for me, no one whose feelings I need to concern myself with. I can stew away as much as I like in my one-room apartment, and I probably will later on. Right now, I can't find the energy, and anyway, I have a feeling I'm supposed to be somewhere this afternoon. If I can't remember where, I'll have to go home and see if it's written down in the notebook resting on my bedside table. But at the moment, it doesn't seem particularly important. And if it is, I'll remember soon. Watching the various people go in and out of the swishing automatic doors is soothing. They all have problems too, or else they wouldn't be here. Different problems than I, some more serious, some less serious, but problems all the same. One man in particular catches my attention. For some reason, the sensor on the door doesn't register his presence. He continues forward and very nearly collides with unyielding plate glass. He steps back, startled, and waits for admittance. When it's not forthcoming, he waves his arms above his head, and as though recognizing him from across a crowded room, the hospital swings open its doors and the man ventures through them, appearing afraid they might close at any moment. I know how he feels. Okay then, what is to be done? I am, apparently, going to lose my mind. Not all of it. I will still know how to tie my shoes and boil water and read and speak, but I won't remember my life. I don't know what to make of this. My life has been a mixed bag. I've spent much of it trying to atone for a mistake I made long ago as a young man. It was a stupid mistake, and I often think that in attempting to settle my debts, I fouled things up even more. Other times, I think I did the best I could. Likely, I'll never know for certain which is right. But what if all that is gone? If each memory that is mine alone slips away forever? Will my burden be lifted, or will it increase? What is a memory, anyway, other than a ghost of something that's been gone for a long time? There are secrets I've kept. Maybe they should stay secrets. No, I will have to tell Alice what has happened, explain myself, clarify what has been left obscure. She deserves to know the whole story. It has been a mistake to keep it from her for all these years. But I'll have to tell her properly, or it will only make things worse. Alice knows most of the story already, but in any story there are details that can be pushed one way or another, and I have definitely pushed them in my favor. There are other details that can be left out entirely, which I have also done when it suited me. The only way is to start at the beginning and tell it as I believe it to be, not as I want it to be. I no longer have the luxury of time. My mind will soon become another door that is no longer open to me. I deprived her of a father. This she has long been aware of. I could tell her all about him. The whole world knows me as the man who killed Harry Houdini, the most famous person on the planet. His story is complicated, though most of it is widely known. What no one knows, save for myself and one other person who likely died long ago, is that I didn't just kill Harry Houdini. I killed him twice. So that's the opening chapter. And so from there, the book sort of takes place, there's three stories going on. There's this present tense story of Martin Strauss, who, as you heard, has just found out he has a disease, which in real life is called Korsakoff syndrome, wherein you lose your memory. And unlike, say, a disease like Alzheimer's, where you lose your memory and it's replaced by nothing, in this case, your brain makes up new memories. It tells stories, which is what the brain is doing all the time anyway. And so you're never really sure, if anything, what portions of your memory are true and what aren't. And so it's a very interesting disease. At any rate, so he's on the bench, and Alice, who you heard referenced, is we're told, Harry Houdini's illegitimate daughter. And she has come to him looking for an explanation as to why he did what he did. And then another frame of the story starts off in 1926 with Martin going to see Harry Houdini at the Princess Theatre in Montreal. And so the story goes, Harry Houdini, among many other things. Now, many of you might think he died in the water torture cell because of that Tony Curtis movie, which is a good movie, but not. It's a movie. Harry Houdini died possibly as a result of a burst appendix sustained by being punched in the stomach before he was ready for it. The deal was he was proud of, he had these amazing stomach muscles, and come on, hit me, I can take any blow. And the story is on October 26, 1926, he was in the October 24th, he was in the Princess Theatre in Montreal, and a man came up to him before he was ready and socked him one. And that led to his appendix bursting, and he died in Detroit 6 or 7 days later on Halloween evening. So Martin is the fellow who, in the book at least, who did this. And even he is not entirely sure why. But after he does this, he very understandably becomes quite an unpopular fellow. I've been fascinated for a long time with people who do sort of heat of the moment, one small thing that completely changes their life. Like that guy, Bartman. Remember Bartman? He went to I think it was a Chicago Cubs game, just a guy wanting to go to a baseball game, and someone hit a foul ball, and he reached over the thing to catch it, and the fielder totally could have got it, and as a result, the game went to extra innings, and the Cubs, it ruined, they lost, and there are bars that if that man were to use his real name in to this day, he would be immediately murdered. And what did he do? All he did was catch a ball at a baseball game in an impulsive moment. So this is sort of Martin's problem, except he gets a note telling him right after this, you better leave town, you're in trouble. So he kind of goes on the run. And then the third portion of the story is the sort of fictionalized biography of Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini is an interesting character for a number of reasons, not the least of which he's an entirely made-up person. There's a trivia question that one might be asked if one were playing trivia, which is, what is Harry Houdini's real name? Harry Houdini was a Hungarian Jew born in Budapest in, I think, 1876-ish, named Erich Weiss. And his parents, his father was a rabbi, and they emigrated to Appleton, Wisconsin shortly after he was born. But it's bigger than just Erich Weiss is Harry Houdini's real name. He created this character of this magician, this escape artist, He was one of the, he makes the, you think of people like, oh my lord, I've almost, Paris Hilton. I thought for a second, I've forgotten finally who that person is. And I or the Kardashians. You know, these people who are famous because they're good at being famous. Harry Houdini was maybe the world's first person who successfully did this. All of the things that, if you think of what he was known for, hanging upside down from a crane in a straitjacket, jumping off a bridge into a river, all this stuff, this wasn't his act. He performed a relatively simple magic act with some handcuff escapes and some fairly decent illusions. This was publicity. He was one of the first people to understand there are two ways to get publicity. One is to pay for a newspaper ad, and the other is to be on the front page for free. But there's a Paul, who is it? No, it's not Paul Auster. Kurt Vonnegut quote, which is, we tend to become what we pretend to be. So we should be careful what we pretend to be. And in Houdini's case, he created this persona, and then it ate him up. And so, really, one of the things the book is looking at is the relationship between the fictional us and the factual us. I'll end, I think, by telling a small story, because one of the questions you always get asked as a writer, and it's a good question, but it's really hard to answer, is what gave you the idea to write this book? And it presumes that there's a Newton-esque moment where an apple falls off a tree and hits you in the head, and you think, aha, book. And in reality, what it normally is, at any given time, I'm sure Maggie can back me up in this, you have a half dozen things going around in your head. Like, I think that is interesting. That's something I don't understand. I like that fact, and I had a dream about a character that said this. And every once in a while, one thing happens that seems to almost magnetize the other things, and I go, foom, 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 foom. And suddenly, everything you see in the world on TV or driving down the road is about that thing. And when that happens, then you have a book to write, and you may not know yet. For me, one of the thing that I think started this off for me was, when I was a kid growing up, there was this great uncle Johnny, Johnny Marshall, my grandmother's brother. And great uncle Johnny was famous for two things. One was being an incredibly great dresser, snappy dresser, and the other was being a checkers champion. I presume this was a thing one could once be. I haven't myself seen checkers tournaments lately, where the opportunity might arise to become. It's like luge. I've often wondered, how does a person get into luge? That's never been, I might be the Wayne Gretzky of luge, and I would never even know, because I don't get to luge. And checkers champion, anyway, digressing. Uncle Johnny was known for checkers and dressing well. And I have one of my earliest strong childhood memories is of being about 6 years old and being in Kamloops at my backyard picnic table, and Uncle Johnny coming over. And I'd never met him before, but I'd heard about him. And he came and he took off he was wearing like a tweedy sort of three-piece suit with a crisp white shirt and a fedora, and he took off his suit coat and laid it, I can picture him laying it meticulously on the picnic table and putting the hat on top of it and rolling up his sleeves and sitting down, and he was drinking lemonade because he was an alcoholic, and letting me beat him at checkers. And I knew that he had let me win. I wasn't so stupid as to think I actually beat Uncle Johnny. But knowing that he had let me win as like his 5-year-old great nephew, it's like one of the proudest feelings I can remember. And as a kid, I was scared, I was terrified of adults. I thought they were all jerks and mean and would yell at you. And this was, this was kind of a moment where I realized maybe not all adults are jerks. Maybe you need to learn how to differentiate between the nice adults and the not nice adults. At any rate, I consider it a formative memory and one of the things that I strongly hold on to from my childhood. Here's the problem. I found out in my early 30s that Uncle Johnny died the year before I was born. So, yeah. So none of that story I told you could possibly be true. And yet I would swear on a stack of Bibles that it is. I would swear in open court if I haven't been sort of going through my grandmother's journal after she died and reading it and seeing, went to Johnny's funeral today and the date, and then looking into it because I still didn't believe her, and finding out I'd seen the death certificate. Uncle Johnny died, 14 months before I was born. So the question, one of the central questions of the book is, and I think we're all walking around with false memories. We may know it, we may not know it, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether we know it or not. Does it matter whether our memories are true? Or does it matter whether the story that they tell is of value to you? I don't claim to have the answer to that. I think the answer will be different for every person, but that's sort of what the book is circling around and trying to get at. Plus, magicians are neat. It's a lot of fun. There's spies, there's intrigue, there's murder most foul. There's stuff with the Romanovs. There's half of the sex scene. It's not a very good, I would skip that page. Anyway, why don't I stop there and then we can do
Maggie, do you want to come up here and we'll do a joint Q&A? Yeah, so we have time for questions. Does anyone have a question for Maggie or Stephen?
This is always the awkward part.
Yeah.
No one wants to go first.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, I understand you teach writing, is that right? You teach writing or you teach
Me?
creative writing? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm the head of the creative writing program at UBC.
Have your students read your books or do you encourage
I don't know. I assume some of them have read probably the books. I think probably maybe one thing people do before picking a graduate program is research the faculty. But I try very hard to never, ever, ever talk to them about my own work because I don't want to. You know, I would rather talk about it. I'd rather talk about Maggie's book or Guy Vanderhaeg's book or Miriam Taves' or someone else than my own work with students because it just feels weird. Because what are they supposed to say? Well, I actually thought that bit with the philodendron was kind of weird and off-putting. Like, they can't have that conversation with me, and I agree that is a weird and off-putting bit. It's supposed to be, but I don't know. I just don't want to. So.
Right.
Didn't your wife read your writing?
Is this for you?
For you, yes.
Yes, but her job is to read it and tell me I don't suck. Because, there are other people I have who read my work who I sort of expect to read me and tell me how bad it is so that I can fix it. Her job is to make me not want to kill myself. So she sort of reads it when I think I'm done. Like, nobody reads my writing while I'm still working on it, because that wrecks it for me. You can probably find this, I don't know. When I know I have done everything I can do on it, I give it to her, and then she says, yes, this is not terrible, and then I can give it to someone else who will then say, yes, it is terrible, but we can fix it. So, what do you have any words?
Well, yeah, I'm part of a critique group and we exchange our work back and forth, but a lot of it, I write it, then give it to them, then I take half of what they say. Or two-thirds.
Half is a lot.
What about your husband? Do you let your husband read your writing?
Yes, he has to. I read it out loud too.
Yeah.
We try and get a conviction.
Yeah. Oh, reading your work out loud is great.
Both of them, how long did it take you to write these two books? One each.
Part of it depends on your definition of right.
Well, from start to finish.
Yeah, about 6 years. 5, 6 years.
And how do you know when it is finished?
When I can't do anything to make it better, you could rewrite the book forever, but when
It's like an artist with a canvas, you know, they want to tweak it.
yeah, at a certain point with a book, though, you're not writing this book better. You're starting a new book within the framework of that old book. It also helps that at a certain point my bank account is empty, and I'm getting threatening phone calls. That's helpful. I think for me, I just kind of know I'm done. If I could. It's not perfect, and I could spend the rest of my life fixing it, and it would still never be perfect. I want to not be working on this anymore.
But 6 years seems an awful long time.
I have lots
One
of
subject.
But that's true, but that's kind of what I love about being a writer, is that, you know...
Are you doing other things simultaneously?
Not writing projects, typically. I'm not a good multitasker writing-wise. But, you know, I work at a university, and I have kids, and I have lunch sometimes with people. But the great thing about being a writer, you know, the only good thing about it, you know, the only thing that makes being a writer worthwhile is that you get to spend an amount each day in a room by yourself living in an imaginary world. And what makes me a novelist and not a short story writer, for example, is I like to spend 4, 5, or 6 years in the same world, and to not spend 3 months in the world and then have to move to a different world and start all over again, because it's kind of terrible finishing a book, because you get fired from the best job you ever had, right? And I can't go hang out with Martin Strauss anymore, it'd be weird. And I did that every day for 6 years, and now it's like, all right, Martin, go out and other people can decide whether you're a jerk or not, but yeah.
Well, from the emerging writer's point of view, I laid down the draft of lockdown in the November novel writing month. 30 days, 50,000 words. And then I spent the next 2.5 years fixing it, expanding it, contracting it, teasing it out, finding out what I was actually saying in the first place. And then I put it away for a while, and let it go, and started sending it to publishers.
Maggie, how many rejections did you get from traditional publishers, if you got any?
Publishers, not that many, because there's not many publishers you can actually directly send it to. Agents and publishers,
yes.
about 25. I mean, so, yeah, we won't talk about some of the others.
And I can't ask you, Steve, the same about
Oh, I get
this,
rejected
but-
way more than she does. One of the myths about being sort of even moderately successful as a writer is that rejection ends. Like, you know, one's opportunity to be rejected more widely. I've been rejected in countries I never even knew exist. My Catalan publisher dropped me for this book. I didn't even know that that was a thing until 2007. And now every Catalan publisher in Spain turned down the book. I don't know how many there are, but it's probably some number. Yeah. Rejection never ends, it just gets more bizarre and grandiose.
Yes.
Yes, well, both of you always like avid readers, creators. Is this something that has been going on ever since you were children, or is it something that has developed later in life, so to speak?
I always read. I didn't have the confidence to start writing till I was 50. There were creative writing classes when I went to university, so that's eventually came back to it. It's probably a much longer answer.
Well, yes, you know, I was a voracious reader as a child. I didn't know being a writer was a thing until I was in university. And I sort of on a whim took a creative writing course and looked around the room and said, what? You guys are here to really? That's a thing? Kind of? And you know, and then I sort of just dropped all my other classes and took a Bachelor of Fine Arts I'm in a Master's of Fine Arts and then realized I have no employable skills at all, so I have to write books.
I have a question.
Okay.
Stephen, I remember maybe like 6 months ago, I remember there was an article in the Vancouver Sun about you entering into a sort of a strange dialogue with one of those like Nigerian scammers. Can you tell that story and what happened with it?
Yeah, I'll try to tell the abbreviated version. There's a Sunshine Post writer named Andrea Schroeder, whose wife Sharon had her Facebook profile stolen. Someone made up a fake Sharon and sent friend requests to all her friends, and none of us really understood what was happening. But then one morning I get a Facebook message from Sharon in the most illegible, illiterate English I've ever read, basically saying, "Great news, friend! You've won $100,000 in a car and a truck." And I thought, oh, that's not true. But instead of, normally I ignore these, but because it was the person who had stolen my friend's thing, I sort of engaged with them. Oh, really? That's fantastic news. And spent the next day and a half exchanging increasingly hyperbolically ridiculous messages with them. And then ended it by photoshopping a lump of cash onto a truck and thanking them so much for their help. Basically, the scam was I had to give them $5,000 to pay to FedEx me the money. It was the most inept, ridiculous thing I have ever, because I cannot believe anyone would fall for this, and yet people must, but it was a weird experience because, number one, I wasted a day and a half just giggling at work. It was maybe the most fun I've ever had. Like I started off by saying, oh yeah, I'll send you the $5,000, no problem, but seeing as how you've come into this money, I could really use a honey glazed ham. Will you send me a honey, Sharon? Come on, send me a ham. And then I was going for a 12 days of Christmas thing. And I said, yes, I will send you the money as soon as you send me a ham, an autographed photo of Betty White, like I had a whole list of things. But what kind of depressed me at the end of it is, I put it on my Facebook wall, and I'm friends with an editor at the province, and they put it on the province website, and by the end of it, 750,000 people read the thing, and or you could work for 6 years on a novel, and have some fraction of that number of eyeballs on your work. So I kind of ended up, it was the funnest day and a half of my life, and it's still to this moment deeply existentially depressing. Plus I entirely failed to monetize it, which I regret. Yeah. I know, there's got to be a way. Yeah, I know.
How long did Finney Walsh take?
Finney Walsh probably took about two and a half years. It's a much shorter book. It turns out if they're shorter, they don't take as long, I've learned. Every book I've written takes me an extra year. Finney Walsh probably took 3 years, Ascension took 4, Cellist of Sarajevo took 5, this one took 6. I've got to reverse this trend somehow. It's not, I got, after the book was finished, in the space of 24 hours, I got a phone call from 4 different editors I work with, and the 2 agents I work with, all saying almost the exact same thing. Congratulations, we're so happy the novel's done, we're really pleased with it. It wouldn't be bad if next time you took 3 or 4 years instead of 6. And at first I thought, oh, that's nice advice. And then I was, wait a minute. 6 people within 24 hours phoning about this. They've talked about this amongst themselves. They've had some sort of teleconference. And what they didn't do in their process was say, guys, we should space these calls out so Galloway doesn't get suspicious.
And change the phrasing.
Yeah, and change the phrasing of it. It's like, this is, oh. Let's take how long it takes.
And one more question here.
Yeah, the Cellist of Sarajevo. Did you benefit from the movie rights?
It depends how you define the word benefit. It has been optioned, and I think I get a small amount of money I personally doubt very much that it will ever be made into a movie, just because most of the book takes place in people's heads and/or involves people standing, which it doesn't film well. I mean, I don't know. There's one of the characters spends the entire book standing at a street corner. That's boring for cinematographers. Apparently, who is working on the fellow Don McKellar, who did The Red Violin and Blindness, has written a script, which I have not read, but I imagine that's about as far as it will go. Movies aren't the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, necessarily everyone thinks they are. It's too bad, because I'd like to be mortgage-free. Or mortgage-lesser.
Any other questions? Yes.
That one's a bestseller. What is the definition of a bestseller in Canada?
I don't know. Trish, do you know?
I think for fiction, it could be around 8,000 copies within the first month or so. Usually, you generally make the golden wheel bestsellers.
Yeah. So I guess 8,000. Well, I don't know, bestseller.
Could be.
There's no like bestseller police. So anyone could call themselves a bestseller and no one would ever come along and say, no, you're not. Yeah, exactly. I mean, best-selling book around my house. Yeah. No, there's lists, I guess, that we draw.
Everybody seems to be in a book club now.
Thank God.
And the books. Is that helping you too? A book club, like fashion?
I don't imagine it's hurting. I think
Oprah?
Oprah has, does she still? Yeah, she does.
She's right now.
I think what's great about book club is just the idea of a bunch of people agreeing to read the same book and then sitting down and maybe having some wine and talking about it. Like that's what, as a writer, you want to have happen. You don't just want your books to sell or be in libraries or exist in the world. You want people to read them and interact with them. And yeah, book clubs are fantastic.
What was your inspiration for Cellist? Is it based on any facts?
Well, it was a combination of having read about the real life incident of Fedrin Smilovich in the street, and sort of being interested in that for a good 10 years before I started writing the book, and just thinking, why is that image so moving? And then after September 11th, being really quite profoundly disturbed and irritated by, in the conversation that was going on about the relative merits of going to war in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, how little of the dialogue, whether one was for or against the war, was about the indisputable fact that in contemporary warfare, 95+% of all casualties are civilians. We don't talk about that ever. No one ever said, Saddam Hussein is a bad guy, we will have to kill some of his soldiers, but for every soldier or Saddam Hussein who dies, we're going to kill 95 Iraqis who are just, getting water or buying bread or crossing the street. We don't talk about that. We have phrases like collateral damage to abdicate responsibility of even thinking about that. Now, you may talk about that and decide the math still works. It's arguable, for example, that the amount of Germans that died in World War II was a justifiable cost of stopping Hitler. But unless you're having that conversation, you can't go forward on using the right man. And sort of that prompted me to then start thinking about, well, what is life like for these people who are living in this place where bombs and bullets are raining down, and they were not party to the geopolitical events that started it. They're not the ones who separated Bosnia from Yugoslavia. They didn't do any of this. And then 5 years go by and you just type some stuff and eventually it makes somewhat more sense.
One more question.
Maggie, you're targeting young readers,
Yeah.
and obviously one thing we make protagonists older teenagers.
Yes.
What else do you do to make it appealing to that audience?
I read YA literature almost exclusively when I'm not reading Galloway.
Who is very young and not that adult. I'm not that young. Yeah.
So I read a lot of YA fiction. I watch the TV shows and some of the movies. And then now I'm reading on I just want to switch streams again.
Oh yeah. What do I do with this microphone? Give it to the person who's
When
talking.
you're writing, when you're putting the book together, are there structural differences because you're targeting a younger audience?
There are some that I've been told by my editor, you must identify right away what your protagonist looks like. You must say what their physical situation is immediately. Teens want to know this. And that's why there's a lot of information in that first paragraph and what you're doing around this, whereas you can lead into a little bit more slowly than I hope. And there has to be a certain kind of resolution to it. Let me go with one resolution I have to work with public. One, yeah. Chosen one by public. Does that help? Oh yeah, I'm watching for anything that will stop the gatekeepers from running into the library. No swearing, or little swearing, or sex, or how you do it doesn't matter very well unless you're junk reading.
All right. Thank you very much to our readers. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for coming. Both Maggie and Stephen, I'm sure, will be happy to sign books in the back and have another glass of wine. And thank you again so much for coming out tonight. Have a wonderful evening.